What in the world makes us so embarrassed about the gospel? For I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. As we come to Mark chapter 1 again, we come to verses 21 to 28. Preliminaries are now done, and Mark begins his actual account of the events of the ministry of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Mark begins the ministry events in his history with one incident that takes place in the synagogue in the city of Capernaum. And Mark's purpose is to demonstrate to us what is essential if we are to accept Jesus Christ, the Son of God, as the new King, as God's Messiah. He must exercise power over the current ruler of this world. He must be able to break the bondage that Satan holds and that demons hold over the souls of sinners. Therefore, Mark begins with an amazing account of how Jesus overpowered a demon. This is one of many, many times and one of many statements about Jesus' power to do that are made through the rest of the first chapter, on into the third chapter, on into the fifth chapter. All of this because it is essential that if Christ is to come and establish His kingdom, He must overpower the current ruler, who is none other than Satan. He must have cosmic authority, authority that is beyond human authority, that is beyond this temporal world. He must have power that extends into the universe. He must have power over all the evil forces that exist in the universe. This is necessary if He is to rescue sinners from bondage to this evil power. And so we find Mark telling us that Jesus has that power. He has already recorded for us in verses 12 and 13 how Jesus vanquished Satan himself, the ruler of that domain, and now we have an incident in which He shows His power over demons. And there will be more to come in the rest of this chapter and in subsequent chapters, leaving no doubt in anyone's mind about His power to break the bondage of Satan that holds sinners captive and carries them all the way to hell. Let's begin in verse 21. They went into Capernaum. That's how He begins the history of Jesus' ministry. They went into Capernaum. They, meaning Jesus and those who were following as His disciples. And immediately on the Sabbath, He entered the synagogue and began to teach. They were amazed at His teaching, for He was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Just then there was a man in their synagogue with an unclean spirit, and he cried out or screamed, saying, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." And Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be quiet and come out of him." Throwing him into convulsions, the unclean spirit cried out with a loud voice and came out of him. They were all amazed, so that they debated among themselves, saying, "What is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey Him." Immediately the news about Him spread everywhere into all the surrounding district of Galilee. Now, there are a number of things that strike you about that account. The one that strikes me, first of all, is the stark difference between the response of the demons to Jesus' authority and the response of the people. His authority amazed the people. That is indicated in verse 22 and again in verse 27. The people were amazed. On the other hand, the demons were terrified. The people were amazed. The demons were terrified. The people wondered. The demons panicked. What was the reason for the difference in the reactions? Simply this: the people didn't know who he was. The demons did. Verse 24, this one demon who speaks on behalf of all of them. When he uses the plural pronouns, what business do we have with each other, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God. The demons knew who he was, obviously. Chapter 3 and verse 11. Whenever the unclean spirits saw him, they would fall down before him and shout, "You are the Son of God." Chapter 5. A man, verse 2 says, with an unclean spirit, coming out of the tombs where he lived, is confronted by Jesus. He is screaming, verse 5 says, constantly night and day in the tombs and in the mountains, and gashing himself with stones. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" In the first half of the Gospel of Mark, the only beings that are sure who Jesus is are the demons. They know him. They have known him since they were created by him. They have known him since they were dwelling in heaven as holy angels before they rebelled. They have known him since they surrounded the throne before Lucifer led them in their rebellion. Luke says in chapter 4, verse 40, the sun was setting, and all who had any were sick with various diseases brought them to him. Laying hands on each of them, he was healing them. Demons also were coming out of many, shouting, "You are the Son of God." But rebuking them, he would not allow them to speak because they knew him to be the Christ. There was no question about their knowledge of Jesus. Here we have then the first testimony in the Gospel of Mark to the identity of Jesus, and it comes from a demon. Chapter 1, verse 24. They know who he is. In fact, in the first half of the Gospel of Mark, they're the only ones who are sure. In chapter 3, in verse 6, the Pharisees and the Herodians do not recognize him as the Messiah and are already trying to find a reason to kill him. In chapter 3, verse 22, the scribes came down from Jerusalem and said about him, he's possessed by Beelzebul, and he casts out the demons by the ruler of the demons. In chapter 6, he began to teach in the synagogue. Verse 2, many listeners were astonished, saying, "Where did this man get these things? And what is this wisdom given to him, and such miracles as these performed by his hands? Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary, and brother of James and Joseph and Judas and Simon? Are not his sisters here with us?" And they took offense at him. The Pharisees didn't know who he was. The Herodians didn't know who he was. The scribes didn't know who he was. The people didn't know who he was. And even his own followers weren't sure. If you look at chapter 8 and verse 17, Jesus recognized their discussion about not having enough bread. The problem with that discussion was they had just been through two miraculous feedings. One where he fed 5,000, one where he fed 4,000 and created the food. How blind can you be after that? So Jesus, aware of this discussion, said to them, "Why do you discuss the fact that you have no bread? Do you not yet see or understand? Do you have a hardened heart? Having eyes, do you not see? Having ears, do you not hear? Do you not remember when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of broken pieces you picked up?" They said to him, 12. "And when I broke the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of broken pieces did you pick up?" And they said to him, 7. And he was saying to them, "Do you not yet understand?" They didn't understand. It wasn't until finally the great confession of Peter in chapter 8, verse 29, "You are the Christ." The first half of the book of Mark, the leaders didn't understand who he was. The people didn't understand who he was. Even his disciples were unsure about who he was. That was the difference. The crowd was amazed. The demons were terrified. The difference, the demons knew they had reason to be afraid. When sinners come to a true understanding of the person of Christ, when sinners come to a true understanding of the authority of Christ as the Son of God, they are also terrified. And terrified sinners tend to run in holy fear to Christ for forgiveness and grace, something demons cannot do. They were terrified and could not be saved. The people were amazed and would not be saved. So the amazed people and the terrified demons end up in the same hell. James 2:19 says, "The demons believe and shudder." What makes demons shudder? What makes demons scream? By the way, I read you a number of passages in Mark in which the demons, when they speak, are always screaming. And you need to understand something. They scream because they're terrified of Jesus. They scream because they're panicked, because they know where they're headed. They know about the lake of fire long before Jesus refers to it in his Olivet Discourse in Matthew 25:41. They know about the lake of fire and that they're going there long before the book of Revelation is written to describe it in chapter 20. They know about it because they know from the time they were thrown out of heaven where they are headed. They know their destruction is coming. They are terrified. They can't resist screaming. You will notice in verse 23, the end of the verse, he cried out. Anakradzo means to shout with strong emotion, to scream. These are the deeply felt screams of someone suffering, someone traumatized. The same verb is used later on to refer to the kind of fear that is expressed in the presence of Christ by certain people. They are in panic because Jesus has arrived. Now, I want you to get something in mind. This is an important thing to understand. The demons do not attack Jesus during his ministry. They attack souls of sinners. They've always done that. They will always do that. They don't attack Jesus. Jesus attacks them. Just by showing up, they panic. They are terrified. They blow their cover. They can't restrain their fear. Because while to us they are invisible, they know to him they are not invisible. And when in his presence, they are fully aware that he recognizes them, and they must therefore scream because of the terror that grips their wicked souls. The demon in this man is a representative of the demon dread that exists in all demons when confronted by Jesus. So this is not an illustration of Jesus going through his ministry attacking demons. Demons are always there. They're around now. They were around before. They will be around until the Lord comes and throws them all in the lake of fire at the end of the time, but they don't always blow their cover. Now remember, Satan is an angel of light, and all his ministers are disguised as angels of light. They want to hide in religion. The last thing a demon wanted to do was to reveal himself in a synagogue. Because the whole idea of being an angel of light is covering yourself in a religious environment. In every false religion, demons dwell. To one degree or another, they possess, oppress, obsess, whatever, people. False teachers are demonized, spouting doctrines of demons by supernatural demonic power. False teachers are in the domain of Satan. False adherents are in the domain of Satan. Demons go to church. They attend every religious service. But Jesus exposes them by simply showing up, and they can't restrain their terror. This one incident is also recorded in Luke 4:31-37. And it answers this very important basic question as to whether the Son of God can save sinners from Satan's kingdom. And the answer is he has complete power already over Satan and also, as illustrated here, over demons. Can he transfer sinners from the domain of darkness into the kingdom of his own power? Can he do that, as Colossians 1:13 puts it? Can he take them out of the kingdom of darkness into the domain of light? Can he overwhelm Satan, who has held sinners captive all their life long, according to Hebrews 2:14 and 15? John 8:44, Jesus said, "You are of your father the devil." 1 John 5:19, the whole world lies in the lap of the evil one. 2 Corinthians 4:3 and 4, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelieving. Ephesians 2, all unbelievers are under the control of the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that works in the sons of disobedience. And in Acts 26:18, it is said that salvation turns one from the domain of Satan to God. Now, if sinners, therefore, are to be liberated from satanic dominion, then the liberator must have power over that kingdom. Can he? Can he tear, as it were, sinners out of the clutches of demons? Well, according to 1 John 3:8, the Son of Man appeared for this purpose, that he might destroy the works of the devil. The Son of Man appeared for this purpose, that he might destroy the works of the devil. The new king has to demonstrate his power to dethrone Satan, to rescue sinners from his power. The need of the human race is twofold. One, we need a sacrifice for our sin. We need a substitute who will pay the penalty for our sin so we don't have to pay the penalty. And then we need someone who has the power to rescue us from the domain of Satan. And so our Lord Jesus left the divine realm and entered this world to be the sacrifice for our sins on the cross and to demonstrate his power to destroy the grip of Satan and demons and rescue sinners. The evil spirits, the demons, know why the Son of God has come. They know the battle is on. They know the kingdom has arrived because the king is present, and they are well aware that this could mean that their destruction is imminent. So more than any other time in history, they escalate their activity in the realm of Judaism. They don't want to expose themselves, but they can't help it when confronted by Jesus. And his invincibility over them becomes manifestly obvious. Now, in this passage, let's ask the question, what makes demons scream when they are confronted by Jesus? What is it about him that makes them panic? What is it about him that terrifies them? Number one, the authority of his word. The authority of his word. It's all about his cosmic authority. Verse 21 and 22. They went into Capernaum. Immediately on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and began to teach. They were amazed at his teaching, for he was teaching them as one having authority and not as the scribes. Now, just in a general sense, the demons do not like the truth. They did not like the fact that Jesus arrived and taught the truth, because they also know that the only possible way in which deceived people can be liberated from their clutches is by means of the truth. Here came Jesus teaching the truth which does damage to their kingdom. Apart from the truth, no one can be rescued from their clutches. He comes with authoritative teaching of the truth. Now let's look at the scene a little bit. They, meaning Jesus and his newly called disciples, you met some of them in the prior passage. Those who were his followers come into Capernaum. This is where Mark begins. Remember, he's been baptized by John in the Jordan River, gone into Judea in the south around Jerusalem, had a ministry there for months and months, finally arriving in Galilee, and all Mark tells us is they went into Capernaum. Capernaum, Capernaum. Nahum is the name of the prophet Nahum. Kephar is village, a village called Nahum. This is at the northwest edge of the Sea of Galilee, at the top of the Sea of Galilee. It is a city that became the largest city on the lake because it was the crossroads. People went through this city going north and south and east and west. It had a Roman garrison because it was a potential area of crime, because there was so much action, so much trade, so much travel, traffic. It had a customs tax office as well. It belonged in the tetrarchy of Herod Antipas on the border of his brother Philip's domain. Capernaum became Jesus' headquarters apparently during his Galilean ministry. It wasn't Nazareth where he came from, because you remember first time he went to Nazareth, according to Luke 4, and preached in the synagogue, they tried to throw him off a cliff. And by the way, Capernaum was a beautiful place, still is, but a very, very sinful place, far away from Jerusalem, far away from the quote-unquote holy influences of core Judaism, on the fringes of a Gentile world. It was a very evil place. In fact, in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus actually said that it would be better for Sodom in the day of judgment than Capernaum. The sins of Capernaum, vile sins, and the opportunity for Capernaum to be exposed to Christ gave them a greater responsibility. And that's why it would be more tolerable for Sodom than Capernaum in the day of judgment. Matthew 11, 23 and 24. Capernaum once had a promenade about 2,500 feet long, we're told by historians, a little walkway on top of an 8-foot wall on the edge of the lake, and piers, perhaps several of them, moving out at least 100 feet into the lake. It was a fishing center, and it was the trade center of the Galilee region. Just to give you perspective, Nazareth is at 1,300 feet above sea level, and Capernaum's about 690 below sea level, so it was straight up to Nazareth, straight down to Capernaum. Jesus went there, established his base of ministry there, and having arrived there, it says, immediately on the Sabbath, he entered the synagogue and began to teach. Luke 4:16 says, as was his custom. He went to the synagogue as was his custom. Of course, he went to the synagogue every Sabbath. Now, what is a synagogue? Simply, a synagogue is a meeting place, a local meeting place, a local meeting place. There are no synagogues in the Old Testament. They had a temple. Temple was the focus of everything. There's no indication that there were local meeting places. There were priests scattered all over the land of Israel. Priests that did some teaching, helped the people, counseled them, were spiritual advisors and all of that. But there's no such thing as a synagogue in the Old Testament. They come out of the captivity. Babylonian captivity, Israel's taken into captivity, 586 BC. They go to Babylon. They haven't got the temple. The temple is destroyed. They want to meet. They collect in small groups. Synagogue is simply a word that means to come together, to collect together. And they came together when they were in captivity. When they returned under Nehemiah, they took the concept of the synagogue back, and apparently it comes then out of their experience in captivity. Synagogues began to proliferate after the captivity, and by the time of Jesus, for example, the Talmud says there were 500 of them in Jerusalem alone. They were like local churches, local assemblies. There were, according to Philo, synagogues drew the name houses of instruction because there the law was read on the Sabbath and explained. And during the week it was a school. And also during the week it was a civil court. Scribes who taught, elders who taught, would become judges who would rule in cases of the law. So they were very, very important places in towns and villages. Josephus says there were about 240 towns and villages in Galilee, and they all had synagogues. Capernaum would have had more than one. Capernaum would have had a lot. It only took 10 men to establish a synagogue. If you had 10 men, that was enough to start a synagogue. They got together. The law was read on the Sabbath. The law was explained to them. Each synagogue had a ruler who really was the organizer, the kind of the executive person, not necessarily a pastor or teacher. Then it had elders. Elders would be responsible for the reading and explaining of the law unless there was a visiting scribe who would do that. Now, when the Lord comes, the synagogues then provide a ready-made opportunity for him to go from place to place, town to town, neighborhood to neighborhood, and teach and explain his message. Maybe they just came into existence for this very purpose. And their tradition was visiting rabbis would speak. So it was no intrusion for a guest to come.